What is up, guys? In this video we're actually going to start using tiles in our ground. So to start, we're just going to add one tile, and then in the next video we're going to actually add all the 4 different types of tiles that we have here. So to start, let's go into our assets folder. We're just going to add the tile that we're going to use into the folder. So let's just pop open that resources folder that you have, and we're just going to drag these guys in. I'm actually just going to drag all 4 at once. So I'll do, these are the 4 tiles that we're going to use for our ground. So we'll take those, drag those in. Be sure you do one thing really fast. You need to move all of these pictures to the 2 times value. And then we should be good to go there. So let's jump into our CC grounds. To start, we're going to go into our constructor. So this is where we're going to actually build everything with our ground using the tiles. We can actually take out this red marker because we're not going to be using it anymore. And now we're going to do a couple things. So we need to figure out how many columns and rows that our ground is going to have depending on the size that is passed in right here. So we're going to create 2 constants. It's going to be, we're going to create cols standing for columns, and we're going to have rows as well. So to get the number of columns, we want to divide the width that our ground is by the side length of the tiles that we have. So let's create a constant up here. The width of the tiles is going to be 38. So we're just going to create this as a constant so we can use it throughout constructing our ground. So I'm going to say let k tile side length, which is going to be a CG float, is going to equal 38. And now let's do that now then. So we're going to say size.width over k tile side length. So this right here theoretically should just get us the value that we're looking for, but we need to do a couple more things really fast because of types. So we need to get cols needs to be an integer value, and size.width and k tile side length are both CG floats. So it's going to give us this weird decimal value, and we're also going to need to add one to that, and I'll explain that in just a second. So for these, we need to do something called casting. So we want to divide these. So it's going to be whatever decimal value that comes out, and we're going to cast that into an int. And all that's going to do is it's going to strip its value of its decimals. So I'm going to say int right here, and that's how you cast anything really. So I'm just going to cast the CG float value in here to an integer by putting int before and then closing parentheses on that statement right afterwards. And this should give us a nice integer value. So one more thing, I'm actually going to pull up a thing really, the Paintbrush tool, just to draw this out for you guys. So what we're doing is we have our ground that we're going to be creating, and we want to divide the width by the tile length. But say the width and tile length, they don't divide equally. We're going to have this kind of funky space over here. So say we have all these tiles, and then we have like this funky space left over because we didn't account for that. So to account for that, we're just going to add 1 to it. So our ground's going to be a little bit longer. It might be a little bit longer than the actual ground, but that won't matter because the ground's going to be repeating itself over and over again. And as long as the user can't see that there's a blank space there, we're good to go. So if it's too long, it's okay. If it's too short, that's bad. So we're going to do a similar thing with the rows here, except with the height. So I'm going to say, we're going to cast it again to an int. It's going to be size.height over k tile side length plus 1. So one thing we have to incorporate is the fact that we multiplied the width by 2. So we want to have the entire thing tiled across. So we need to do one more thing here, and we just need to multiply the cols by 2. So this is going to be times 2, just like that. So now that we have the number of calls and the number of rows, we can actually use 2 for loops to kind of sort through the whole thing and construct it. So this is pretty cool. It's probably going to be a little bit complicated or weird for anyone who doesn't have significant experience with for loops, but just bear with me for just a little bit here. So I'm going to just type this out. I'm going to say for var I equals 0, I is less than rows, I plus plus. And then I'm going to put one more for loop in there. So I'm going to say for var j equals 0, j is less than calls, j plus plus. So if you can think about this, I'll pull up this diagram again. This very rough diagram. We have, I was going to cover up. Let me scroll this down just a bit. Okay, that's good enough. So you say, like, you can think of this as we go through, this for loop is going to initiate itself, and it's going to go through one round of loops. So this is what it's going to represent every single row that we're going across. So it's going to start right here, and then it's going to go through this for loop, the number of calls, whatever number of times, number of columns that we have. So it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's going to construct all these tiles and position them and add them to our ground. And after that's done, it's going to loop back down and go through the for loop, the first for loop a second time. And it's going to do the same thing over and over again until it's completely filled our ground with tiles. So that might sound a little confusing. I think as soon as we kind of construct it, it might make a little bit more sense. So let's do that really fast. So I'm going to say, right here, we want to create the actual tile. So I'm going to say let tile equals skSpriteNode, image named. And the image that we want to use that we just added to the scene in the beginning is called ground1. And we also want to set this guy's anchor point. So this is just going to make it easier to position the tile. If we do this, 0.0, 1.0, this is going to set the anchor point in the top left corner. So that's where this tile is going to position itself from. So, and the reason it does this is with anchor points, it's from 0 to 1 for both values. So if this were just 0.5, 0.5, it'd be in the center. If it were 1.00, it would be in the bottom right corner, and so on and so forth. So now that we have that set up, let's do one thing to make this easier for us. We're going to create an X shift and a Y shift. And this is going to make it, just because we have the tile, it starts out, if we were just to add a tile to the scene, it would start out positioned in the center. If we have an X shift of the width over 2 and a Y shift of height over 2, we can make it so essentially we can add everything from this point. And you'll see what I'm talking about in just a second as well. So I'll say let X shift equal minus self.size.width over 2, and let Y shift equal self.size.height over 2. When we actually position this, this is when this X shift and Y shift comes into account. I'm going to say tile.position equals CG point make X shift plus CG float J. Actually, here I'm just going to type all this out. I think it's going to be easier, and then I'll explain afterwards. So we're going to multiply this by the K tile side length, and then we'll do Y shift minus CG float I times K tile side length. And ultimately, we're just going to add it to our ground. So what this is doing is it's taking this X shift and this Y shift. It's starting right here, and then it's adding whatever. So for our J represents our column that we're currently on. So it's going to add whatever column you're on times the K tile side length for that given tile that we're creating. And it's going to add that value to the X position. And then for the Y position, it's going to do the same thing. It's just going to subtract the value. So it's going to position that depending on whatever row you are on. So let's run this really fast. And we should get a ground that's kind of nicely tiled out. It's not going to be super pretty because we didn't use all four kinds of tiles. But now if you click, you can see you have the ground moving constantly. It kind of just looks like it's twitching, I think, because it's moving so fast. If we go down into our start method, just to make sure we're doing everything right, we can put the move left duration to 5.0. And then we get this nice ground that's kind of moving along infinitely. So sorry guys, that was a lot to pack into your heads. And in the next video, we'll have a little more time to kind of solidify everything we just talked about.